Book 6, Chapter 21, of War and Peace, Volume 2, by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Elmer Maude. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Book 6, Chapter 21. Pierre, as one of the principal guests, had to sit down to Boston with Count Rostov, the general, and the colonel. At the card table, he happened to be directly facing Natasha, and was struck by a curious change that had come over her since the ball. She was silent, and not only less pretty than at the ball, but only redeemed from plainness by her look of gentle indifference to everything around. "What's the matter with her?" thought Pierre, glancing at her. She was sitting by her sister at the tea-table, and reluctantly, without looking at him, made some reply to Boris, who sat down beside her. After playing out a whole suit, and to his partner's delight taking 5 tricks, Pierre, hearing greetings and the steps of someone who had entered the room while he was picking up his tricks, glanced again at Natasha. "What has happened to her?" he asked himself with still greater surprise. Prince Andrew was standing before her, saying something to her with a look of tender solicitude. She, having raised her head, was looking up at him, flushed and evidently trying to master her rapid breathing. And the bright glow of some inner fire that had been suppressed was again alight in her. She was completely transformed, and from a plain girl had again become what she had been at the ball. Prince Andrew went up to Pierre, and the latter noticed a new and youthful expression on his friend's face. Pierre changed places several times during the game, sitting now with his back to Natasha and now facing her, but during the hold of the 6 rubbers he watched her and his friend. "Something very important is happening between them," thought Pierre, and a feeling that was both joyful and painful agitated him and made him neglect the game. After 6 rubbers, the general got up, saying that it was no use playing like that, and Pierre was released. Natasha, on one side, was talking with Sonia and Boris, and Vera, with a subtle smile, was saying something to Prince Andrew. Pierre went up to his friend, and asking whether they were talking secrets, sat down beside them. Vera, having noticed Prince Andrew's attention to Natasha, decided that at a party, a real evening party, subtle allusions to the tender passion were absolutely necessary, and seizing a moment when Prince Andrew was alone, began a conversation with him about feelings in general and about her sister. With so intellectual a guest as she considered Prince Andrew to be, she felt that she had to employ her diplomatic tact. When Pierre went up to them, he noticed that Vera was being carried away by her self-satisfied talk, but that Prince Andrew seemed embarrassed, a thing that rarely happened with him. "What do you think?" Vera was saying with an arch smile. "You are so discerning, Prince, and understand people's characters so well at a glance. What do you think of Natalie? Could she be constant in her attachments? Could she, like other women," Vera meant herself, "love a man once for all and remain true to him forever? That is what I consider true love. What do you think, Prince?" "I know your sister too little," replied Prince Andrew, with a sarcastic smile under which he wished to hide his embarrassment, "to be able to solve so delicate a question. And then I have noticed that the less attractive a woman is, the more constant she is likely to be," he added, and looked up at Pierre, who was just approaching them. "Yes, that is true, Prince. In our days," continued Vera, mentioning our days as people of limited intelligence are fond of doing, imagining that they have discovered and appraised the peculiarities of our days, and that human characteristics change with the times. "In our days a girl has so much freedom that the pleasure of being courted often stifles real feeling in her, and it must be confessed that Natalie's very susceptible." This return to the subject of Natalie caused Prince Andrew to knit his brows with discomfort. He was about to rise, but Vera continued with a still more subtle smile. "I think no one has been more courted than she," she went on. "But till quite lately she never cared seriously for anyone. Now, you know, Count," she said to Pierre, "even our dear cousin Boris, who, between ourselves, was very far gone in the land of tenderness," alluding to a map of love much in vogue at that time. Prince Andrew frowned and remained silent. "You are friendly with Boris, aren't you?" asked Vera. "Yes, I know him." "I expect he has told you of his childish love for Natasha?" "Oh, there was childish love?" suddenly asked Prince Andrew, blushing unexpectedly. "Yes, you know between cousins intimacy often leads to love. Le cousinage est un dangereux voisinage." "Cousinhood is a dangerous neighborhood. Don't you think so?" "Oh, undoubtedly," said Prince Andrew. And with sudden and unnatural liveliness he began chaffing Pierre about the need to be very careful with his 50-year-old Moscow cousins, and in the midst of these jesting remarks he rose, taking Pierre by the arm, and drew him aside. "Well?" asked Pierre, seeing his friend's strange animation with surprise, and noticing the glance he turned on Natasha as he rose. I must have a talk with you," said Prince Andrew. "You know that pair of women's gloves?" He referred to the Masonic gloves given to a newly initiated brother to present to the woman he loved. But no, I will talk to you later on." And with a strange light in his eyes and restlessness in his movements, Prince Andrew approached Natasha and sat down beside her. Pierre saw how Prince Andrew asked her something, and how she flushed as she replied. But at that moment Berg came to Pierre and began insisting that he should take part in an argument between the general and the colonel on the affairs in Spain. Berg was satisfied and happy. The smile of pleasure never left his face. The party was very successful, and quite like other parties he had seen. Everything was similar: the ladies' subtle talk, the cards, the general raising his voice at the card-table, and the samovar and the tea-cakes. Only one thing was lacking that he had always seen at the evening parties he wished to imitate. They had not yet had a loud conversation among the men and a dispute about something important and clever. Now the general had begun such a discussion, and so Berg drew Pierre to it. End of Book 6, Chapter 21. Book 6, Chapter 22, of War and Peace, Volume 2, by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Elmer Maude. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Book 6, Chapter 22. Next day, having been invited by the Count, Prince Andrew dined with the Rostovs and spent the rest of the day there. Everyone in the house realized for whose sake Prince Andrew came, and without concealing it, he tried to be with Natasha all day. Not only in the soul of the frightened yet happy and enraptured Natasha, but in the whole house, there was a feeling of awe at something important that was bound to happen. The Countess looked with sad and sternly serious eyes at Prince Andrew when he talked to Natasha and timidly started some artificial conversation about trifles as soon as he looked her way. Sonia was afraid to leave Natasha and afraid of being in the way when she was with them. Natasha grew pale, in a panic of expectation, when she remained alone with him for a moment. Prince Andrew surprised her by his timidity. She felt that he wanted to say something to her, but could not bring himself to do so. In the evening, when Prince Andrew had left, the Countess went up to Natasha and whispered, "Well, what?" "Mamma, for heaven's sake, don't ask me anything now. One can't talk about that," said Natasha. But all the same, that night Natasha, now agitated and now frightened, lay a long time in her mother's bed gazing straight before her. She told her how he had complimented her, how he told her he was going abroad, asked her where they were going to spend the summer, and then how he had asked her about Boris. "But such a never happened to me before," she said. "Only I feel afraid in his presence. I am always afraid when I'm with him. What does that mean? Does it mean that it's the real thing? Yes? Mamma, are you asleep?" "No, my love, I am frightened myself," answered her mother. "Now go." "All the same, I shan't sleep. What silliness to sleep! Mummy, Mummy, such a thing never happened to me before," she said, surprised and alarmed at the feeling she was aware of in herself. "And could we ever have thought—" It seemed to Natasha that even at the time she first saw Prince Andrew at Otradno, she had fallen in love with him. It was as if she feared this strange, unexpected happiness of meeting again the very man she had then chosen. She was firmly convinced she had done so, and of finding him, as it seemed, not indifferent to her. "And it had to happen that he should come specially to Petersburg while we are here. And it had to happen that we should meet at that ball. It is fate. Clearly it is fate that everything led up to this. Already then, directly I saw him, I felt something peculiar." "What else did he say to you? What are those verses? Read them," said her mother, thoughtfully referring to some verses Prince Andrew had written in Natasha's album. "Mamma, one need not be ashamed of his being a widower." "Don't, Natasha. Pray to God. Marriages are made in heaven," said her mother. "Darling Mummy, how I love you! How happy I am!" cried Natasha, shedding tears of joy and excitement and embracing her mother. At that very time Prince Andrew was sitting with Pierre and telling him of his love for Natasha and his firm resolve to make her his wife. That day Countess Hélène had a reception at her house. The French ambassador was there, and a foreign prince of the blood who had of late become a frequent visitor of hers, and many brilliant ladies and gentlemen. Pierre, who had come downstairs, walked through the rooms and struck everyone by his preoccupied, absent-minded, and morose air. Since the ball he had felt the approach of a fit of nervous depression, and had made desperate efforts to combat it. Since the intimacy of his wife with the royal prince, Pierre had unexpectedly been made a gentleman of the bedchamber, and from that time he had begun to feel oppressed and ashamed in court society, and dark thoughts of the vanity of all things human came to him oftener than before. At the same time, the feeling he had noticed between his protégée Natasha and Prince Andrew accentuated his gloom by the contrast between his own position and his friend's. He tried equally to avoid thinking about his wife and about Natasha and Prince Andrew, and again everything seemed to him insignificant in comparison with eternity. Again the question, for what, presented itself, and he forced himself to work day and night at Masonic labors, hoping to drive away the evil spirit that threatened him. Toward midnight, after he had left the Countess' apartments, he was sitting upstairs in a shabby dressing-gown, copying out the original transaction of the Scottish Lodge of Freemasons at a table in his low room cloudy with tobacco smoke, when someone came in. It was Prince Andrew. "Ah, it's you," said Pierre with a preoccupied, dissatisfied air. "And I, you see, am hard at it." He pointed to his manuscript book with that air of escaping from the ills of life with which unhappy people look at their work. Prince Andrew, with a beaming, ecstatic expression of renewed life on his face, paused in front of Pierre, and, not noticing his sad look, smiled at him with the egotism of joy. "Well, dear heart," said he, "I wanted to tell you about it yesterday, and I have come to do so today. I never experienced anything like it before. I am in love, my friend." Suddenly Pierre heaved a deep sigh and dumped his heavy person down on the sofa beside Prince Andrew. "With Natasha Rostova, yes," said he. "Yes, yes. Who else should it be? I should never have believed it, but the feeling is stronger than I. Yesterday I tormented myself and suffered, but I would not exchange even that torment for anything in the world. I have not lived till now. At last I live. But I can't live without her. But can she love me? I am too old for her. Why don't you speak?" "I? I? What did I tell you?" said Pierre, suddenly rising and beginning to pace up and down the room. "I always thought it. That girl is such a treasure. She is a rare girl. My dear friend, I entreat you, don't philosophize, don't doubt. Marry, 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 and I am sure there will not be a happier man than you." "But what of her?" "She loves you." "Don't talk rubbish," said Prince Andrew, smiling and looking into Pierre's eyes. "She does, I know," Pierre cried fiercely. "But do listen. returned Prince Andrew, holding him by the arm. "Do you know the condition I am in? I must talk about it to someone." "Well, go on, go on. I am very glad," said Pierre, and his face really changed. His brow became smooth, and he listened gladly to Prince Andrew. Prince Andrew seemed, and really was, quite a different, quite a new man. Where was his spleen, his contempt for life, his disillusionment? Pierre was the only person to whom he made up his mind to speak openly, and to him he told all that was in his soul. Now he boldly and lightly made plans for an extended future, said he could not sacrifice his own happiness to his father's caprice, and spoke of how he would either make his father consent to this marriage and love her, or would do without his consent. Then he marveled at the feeling that had mastered him as at something strange, apart from and independent of himself. "I should not have believed anyone who told me that I was capable of such love," said Prince Andrew. "It is not at all the same feeling that I knew in the past. The whole world is now for me divided into two halves. One half is she, and there is all joy, hope, light. The other half is everything where she is not, and there is all gloom and darkness." "Darkness and gloom," reiterated Pierre. "Yes, yes, I understand that. I cannot help loving the light. It is not my fault. And I am very happy. You understand me? I know you are glad for my sake." "Yes, yes," Pierre assented, looking at his friend with a touched and sad expression in his eyes. The brighter Prince Andrew's lot appeared to him, the gloomier seemed his own. End of Book 6, Chapter 22. Something gripped her throat, and regardless of manners she stared straight at Prince Andrew with wide-open eyes. "At once? This instant? No, it can't be," she thought. Again he glanced at her, and that glance convinced her that she was not mistaken. Yes, at once, that very instant, her fate would be decided. "Go, Natasha. I will call you," said the Countess in a whisper. Natasha glanced with frightened, imploring eyes at Prince Andrew and at her mother, and went out. "I have come, Countess, to ask for your daughter's hand," said Prince Andrew. The Countess' face flushed hotly, but she said nothing. "Your offer," she began at last sedately. He remained silent, looking into her eyes. "Your offer," she grew confused, "is agreeable to us, and I accept your offer. I am glad. And my husband, I hope, but it will depend on her." "I will speak to her when I have your consent. Do you give it to me?" said Prince Andrew. "Yes," replied the Countess. She held out her hand to him, and with a mixed feeling of estrangement and tenderness pressed her lips to his forehead as he stooped to kiss her hand. She wished to love him as a son, but felt that to her he was a stranger and a terrifying man. "I am sure my husband will consent," said the Countess. "But your father—" "My father, to whom I have told my plans, has made it an express condition of his consent that the wedding is not to take place for a year, and I wish to tell you of that," said Prince Andrew. "It is true that Natasha is still young, but so long as that—" "It is unavoidable," said Prince Andrew with a sigh. "I will send her to you," said the Countess, and left the room. "Lord have mercy upon us," she repeated while seeking her daughter. Sonia said that Natasha was in her bedroom. Natasha was sitting on the bed, pale and dry-eyed, and was gazing at the icons and whispering something as she rapidly crossed herself. Seeing her mother, she jumped up and flew to her. "Well, Mamma? Well?" "Go to him. He is asking for your hand," said the Countess, coldly it seemed to Natasha. Go," said the mother, sadly and reproachfully, with a deep sigh, as her daughter ran away. Natasha never remembered how she entered the drawing-room. When she came in and saw him, she paused. "Is it possible that this stranger has now become everything to me?" she asked herself, and immediately answered, "Yes, everything. He alone is now dearer to me than everything in the world." Prince Andrew came up to her with downcast eyes. "I have loved you from the very first moment I saw you. May I hope?" He looked at her and was struck by the serious, impassioned expression of her face. Her face said, "Why ask? Why doubt what you cannot but know? Why speak when words cannot express what one feels?" She drew near to him and stopped. He took her hand and kissed it. "Do you love me?" "Yes, yes," Natasha murmured, as if in vexation. Then she sighed loudly, and catching her breath more and more quickly, began to sob. "What is it? What's the matter?" "Oh, I am so happy," she replied, smiled through her tears, bent over close to him, paused for an instant as if asking herself whether she might, and then kissed him. Prince Andrew held her hands, looked into her eyes, and did not find in his heart his former love for her. Something in him had suddenly changed. There was no longer the former poetic and mystic charm of desire, but there was pity for her feminine and childish weakness, fear at her devotion and trustfulness, and an oppressive yet joyful sense of the duty that now bound him to her forever. The present feeling, though not so bright and poetic as the former, was stronger and more serious. "Did your mother tell you that it cannot be for a year?" asked Prince Andrew, still looking into her eyes. "Is it possible that I, the chit of a girl, as everybody called me," thought Natasha, "is it possible that I am now to be the wife and the equal of this strange, dear, clever man whom even my father looks up to? Can it be true? Can it be true that there can be no more playing with life, that now I am grown up, that on me now lies a responsibility for my every word and deed? Yes, but what did he ask me?" "No," she replied, but she had not understood his question. "Forgive me," he said, "but you are so young, and I have already been through so much in life. I am afraid for you. You do not yet know yourself." Natasha listened with concentrated attention, trying but failing to take in the meaning of his words. "Hard as this year which delays my happiness will be," continued Prince Andrew, "it will give you time to be sure of yourself. I ask you to make me happy in a year, but you are free. Our engagement shall remain a secret, and should you find that you do not love me, or should you come to love—" said Prince Andrew with an unnatural smile. "Why do you say that?" Natasha interrupted him. "You know that from the very day you first came to Otrádnoe I have loved you," she cried, quite convinced that she spoke the truth. "In a year you will learn to know yourself." "A whole year!" Natasha repeated suddenly, only now realizing that the marriage was to be postponed for a year. "But why a year? Why a year?" Prince Andrew began to explain to her the reasons for this delay. Natasha did not hear him. "And it can't be helped?" she asked. Prince Andrew did not reply, but his face expressed the impossibility of altering that decision. "It's awful! Oh, it's awful! Awful!" Natasha suddenly cried, and again burst into sobs. "I shall die, waiting a year! It's impossible! It's awful!" She looked into her lover's face and saw in it a look of commiseration and perplexity. "No, no, I'll do anything," she said, suddenly checking her tears. "I am so happy." The father and mother came into the room and gave the betrothed couple their blessing. From that day Prince Andrew began to frequent the Rostovs as Natasha's affianced lover. End of Book 6, Chapter 23.